Beyond the Artificial Twilight. Chapter 1, The Unease in the Green. The year was 2247. Sunlight bled in a golden gash across the horizon of Kepler 186f, painting the alien sky in a kaleidoscope of orange and purple hues. Inside the biodome, bathed in the constant artificial twilight, Kyle Sameera felt a restlessness gnawing at him. Unlike the other teenagers huddled over their VR pods, his gaze kept drifting towards the lush forest visible through the massive dome window. Kyle wasn't quite like the other humans. Raised by Azra, a Sylvan with skin that shimmered like emerald and eyes that held the secrets of the forest, he always felt a little out of place. The telepathic whispers and serene demeanor of the Sylvans left him bewildered, while the other human kids saw him as an oddity, a human who preferred the rustling leaves and earthy smells of the forest to the sterile perfection of the biodome. Today, the usual symphony of the forest held a jarring note. A prickling unease crawled up his spine as he approached the edge of the artificial wilderness, the carefully maintained paths giving way to a tangle of vibrant undergrowth. Reaching out, he brushed against a fern, feeling its delicate fronds tickle his hand. But instead of the usual calming hum, he felt a faint tremor, a disquiet unlike anything he'd ever sensed before. It wasn't just a feeling, it was an emotion, fear, a primal, raw fear that sent shivers down his spine. But this wasn't human fear. It was different, an alien terror that resonated deep within him. Kyle possessed a peculiar gift. He could sense the emotions of plants, a seemingly useless ability that made him an outsider to both humans and Sylvans. Hesitantly, curiosity overriding trepidation, Kyle pushed deeper into the tangled undergrowth. The familiar paths yielded to a labyrinth of vines and towering ferns, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy in emerald shards. He stopped by a towering crystal-bark tree, its leaves shimmering with an iridescent sheen. As he reached out to touch it, a jolt of energy coursed through him, a whisper of cool energy traveling up his arm. This thrum wasn't the gentle hum of healthy plants. It crackled with an urgency that sent a wave of nausea rising in his throat. Driven by a morbid curiosity, Kyle pressed on, the disquiet intensifying with every step. He finally stumbled upon a hidden clearing bathed in an eerie green glow. There in the center pulsated a network of thick glowing vines unlike any plant life he'd ever seen. They writhed and pulsed with an otherworldly light, casting long dancing shadows on the forest floor. A low hum resonated from them, a sound that vibrated through his bones and sent chills crawling down his spine. Fear, raw and unadulterated, emanated from the heart of the network. But there was something else too, a desperate plea for help. Panic welled up within him, tightening his throat. He stumbled back, heart pounding against his ribs. This was something far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Chapter 2, Shadows and Whispers. Kyle navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the Sylvan enclave, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He needed Azra, his adoptive mother, the only one he could trust with the unsettling discovery. He found her tending a grove of luminescent orchids, their ethereal glow highlighting the emerald cast to her skin. As his eyes met hers, a flicker of worry crossed her expressive face. "Kyle, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice a melody that soothed his racing pulse slightly. Kyle hesitated, unsure how to explain the chilling encounter with the pulsing network. He blurted out fragments, the hidden clearing, the glowing vines, the overwhelming fear. He watched Azra's face, searching for a reaction. Azra listened patiently, her expression a mask of studied calmness. When he finished, a long silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. "Fear from a plant? That's impossible," Azra finally said, a hint of something akin to disbelief in her voice. "But I felt it, Azra," Kyle insisted, his voice laced with frustration. "It was like a scream, a terror unlike anything I've ever sensed." Azra's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something that looked like concern replacing her initial skepticism. "We should investigate," she said finally, a hint of a decision hardening her voice. "But be careful, Kyle. The forest beyond the biodome path is unpredictable." Together they ventured out, navigating the tangled undergrowth under the watchful gaze of the setting alien sun. Reaching the clearing, Kyle felt the same tremor run through him as he gazed upon the pulsing network. Azra closed her eyes, reaching out with a hand in what appeared to be a telepathic gesture. A gasp escaped her lips. "Their connection! It's severed!" she exclaimed, her voice laced with alarm. Kyle's confusion mirrored on his face. "Severed connection?" he echoed, unsure what that meant. As if reading his mind, Azra turned to him, her expression graver than he'd ever seen it. She pointed to the network, the vines pulsing with a sickly green light. "This," she explained, "it regulates the biodome's climate and resources. Nutrients, water, temperature. It controls it all." A dawning comprehension filled Kyle. This wasn't just about strange plants or unsettling emotions. This network was the very lifeblood of the biodome. And if it was severed, what did that imply? He looked at Azra, a question forming in his throat. "The Sylvans," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "They control it?" Azra hesitated, then nodded slowly. We maintain the balance." Kyle felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him. All this time, the Sylvans had been controlling the environment, manipulating the very life force of the biodome. Did they intend to keep it a secret forever? A bitter taste filled his mouth. Were they truly benevolent, or was there something more sinister at play? Across the clearing, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure emerged from the undergrowth, a human silhouette stark against the emerald glow. As the figure stepped closer, Kyle recognized Berendina Marietta, the charismatic leader of the human faction. Her face uncharacteristically grim. "Azra," Berendina's voice cut through the tense silence, "we know what you've been hiding. We demand transparency and full access to the biodome's control systems." Azra and Kyle exchanged a worried glance. The tension within the biodome had reached a boiling point, and Kyle suddenly felt caught in the middle, unsure of where his loyalty truly lay. He belonged to neither humans nor Sylvans completely, yet he felt a responsibility to both. He had a feeling the unsettling thrum of the network was just the beginning of a much larger storm. Chapter 3: Dance of Dissonance. Days bled into nights within the biodome, the artificial twilight a constant reminder of the world Kyle longed to explore. Yet a growing unease gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the image of the pulsating network, the raw fear emanating from its pulsing depths. He yearned for answers, but Azra remained tight-lipped. One moonless night, drawn by an unseen force stronger than curiosity, Kyle found himself at the edge of the biodome. He peeked through the temperature barrier, a prickle of excitement tingling down his spine. There, in the heart of the forbidden forest, a spectacle unfolded. A circle of Sylvans, adorned with bioluminescent flowers woven into their shimmering hair, danced around the network of glowing vines. Their movements were fluid, mesmerizing, a silent language Kyle couldn't decipher. Suddenly, a deep rhythmic chanting filled the air, a sound that resonated within his very bones. As the chant reached a crescendo, a surge of energy pulsed through the network. The vines glowed brighter, and Kyle felt a tangible shift in the atmosphere within the biodome. A shiver ran down his spine as a cool breeze, unheard of within the artificial environment, swept through the trees. He gasped, understanding dawning on him. The Sylvans. They were controlling the weather. He watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. The biodome, usually bathed in a gentle humidity, began to cool, droplets forming on the leaves. Fear battled with anger within him. The Sylvans, his supposed family, were manipulating the very environment they claimed to protect. He stormed back to the enclave, bursting into Azra's living quarters. The room buzzed with the tension of the unfolding night. "What was that?" he demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained anger. "You control the weather? Why?" Azra spun around, her emerald eyes wide with alarm. "Kyle, you shouldn't have seen that," she said, her voice strained. "It's not for you to understand." "It's not for me to understand?" Kyle scoffed. "You manipulate the air we breathe, the water we drink, and all you say is not for me to understand." Azra sighed, her ethereal beauty dimmed by worry. We maintain the balance, Kyle. Sometimes humans take too much. So you keep us trapped in this artificial bubble? Kyle's anger flared. We have a right to know, a right to explore. Azra looked at him, her eyes filled with a sadness he couldn't decipher. The network, it's not just a machine, Kyle. It's a living being, part of a complex system that regulates the entire planet's ecosystem. Humans, your insatiable desire for progress could destroy it all. Before Kyle could respond, a harsh voice crackled through the room, the biodome speakers amplifying the message. It was Barandina Marietta, the leader of the human faction, her voice dripping with accusation. Sylvans, your deceit is exposed. You hoard the power, the resources we need to thrive. We demand access to the biodome's control systems. Azra's face paled further. Kyle felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He knew this wouldn't end well. Suddenly, the gentle hum of the biodome faltered, replaced by a sickening silence. Darkness engulfed them momentarily before the emergency backup lights flickered on. Panic erupted within the enclave as Sylvans rushed to diagnose the problem. The network! It's severed! Someone cried. Azra rushed out, a look of horror etched on her face. Kyle followed, a chilling realization dawning on him. The uprising had begun, and the biodome was on the brink of chaos. A figure emerged from the shadows a Sylvan Kyle didn't recognize. His emerald skin was marred by a network of crimson scars, and his eyes burned with defiance. In his hand, he clutched a strange device, crackling with stolen energy. We are free, the rogue Sylvan declared, his voice laced with a bitter triumph. The future of the biodome belongs to humanity. Kyle stared at the figure, at the severed network, and at the Sylvans, their faces masks of despair. A wave of nausea washed over him. The delicate balance of the biodome had been shattered, and he feared the consequences would be dire for everyone. Chapter 4. Whispers of Hope. Chaos reigned within the biodome. Emergency lights cast an eerie glow on the panicked faces of humans and Sylvans alike. The artificial climate sputtered, the once constant humidity replaced by a dry, oppressive heat. Kyle watched in horror as Barandina, her face flushed with victory, used the stolen control to manipulate the network. A wave of despair washed over him. Humanity's greed had tipped the scales, and the consequences were swift and merciless. He looked at the network, the once vibrant vines now pulsating with a sickly yellow light. The raw fear he'd sensed earlier was gone, replaced by a dull thrum of apathy. The life force of the biodome was draining away. But amidst the despair, a flicker of defiance sparked within him. He wouldn't let this be the end. He remembered Azra's words. The network wasn't a machine, it was a living being. Desperate, he approached the pulsing vines, ignoring the shouts and pleas erupting around him. He reached out, his hand hovering just above the glowing surface. He closed his eyes, focusing on the emotions he'd gleaned from the plants ever since he was a child. He poured his fear, his anger, and most importantly, his deep empathy for the suffering biodome into a mental plea. He didn't know if the network could understand, but he had to try. A tense silence followed. Then a faint flicker of light caught his eye. One tendril of the vine, the one closest to his hand, pulsed a vibrant green, a stark contrast to the sickly yellow that dominated the network. Hope surged through him. He wasn't alone. He glanced towards Azra, who stood nearby, her eyes wide with surprise. Azra, he whispered urgently. They can communicate. Azra rushed to his side, her face etched with a mixture of hope and disbelief. But how? She breathed. Kyle closed his eyes again, focusing on the bioluminescent pulse of the vine. It wasn't like human speech, but a series of intricate light patterns, conveying a sense of pain, exhaustion, and a deep longing for balance. He translated hesitantly, voicing the network's message for Azra. Azra listened intently, her eyes glistening with tears. They are willing to negotiate. Kyle felt a surge of relief. He spent the next few hours bridging the gap between the network and humanity. With Azra's guidance, he learned to decode and respond in the bioluminescent language. He bargained on behalf of humans, promising cooperation and sustainable practices in exchange for the network's help in restoring balance. The network responded slowly, hesitantly. But Kyle sensed a flicker of trust, a recognition of his genuine empathy for their suffering. Finally, with a surge of vibrant green light that pulsed through the entire network, the negotiation was complete. A wave of energy flowed outwards, counteracting Barandina's manipulation. The artificial rain began to fall, a gentle patter against the biodome roof. The temperature dipped, the oppressive heat giving way to a refreshing coolness. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the crowd, replaced by cautious optimism. Kyle looked at Azra, a tired smile gracing his lips. He had played a dangerous game, bridging the gap between two seemingly disparate worlds. As the crisis subsided, one thing was clear. The future of the biodome depended on a delicate balance, a respect for nature that went beyond human control. The whispers of the network, once a source of fear, now resonated with a message of hope, a message that humans had much to learn from the delicate balance of the living world. Chapter 5, Seeds of Understanding. The aftermath of the crisis hung heavy in the biodome. The artificial twilight seemed dimmer, a stark reminder of their brush with disaster. Kyle stood amidst the gathering crowd, a mix of humans and Sylvans, their faces a palette of relief, exhaustion, and a flicker of uncertainty. He took a deep breath, the bioluminescent glow of the restored network pulsing faintly behind him. "We almost lost everything," he began, his voice echoing in the tense silence. He spoke of Barandina's reckless manipulation, exposing the network's true nature, a sentient being, the lifeblood of their fragile ecosystem. Shame flushed across the faces of many humans, their initial anger replaced by a deep sense of remorse. Kyle recounted his desperate attempt to communicate, the network's hesitant response, and the final hard-won agreement. He spoke of the delicate balance they had so carelessly disrupted, the importance of respecting the intricate web of life that sustained them all. Azra stepped forward, her emerald eyes glistening with tears. "Kyle speaks the truth," she said, her voice filled with a newfound respect. "The network, it is a teacher, a reminder of our dependence on nature's harmony." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Barandina, stripped of her stolen power, stood silent and isolated, the weight of her actions etched on her face. The days that followed were filled with a flurry of activity. Humans and Sylvans, united for the first time by a common purpose, worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Kyle became a bridge between the two species, translating the bioluminescent language of the network, guiding humans in their efforts to understand and respect the delicate balance. He showed them how to monitor the network's subtle pulses, how to interpret its needs. He taught them sustainable practices, a way to live in harmony with the biodome rather than in opposition to it. The future of Kepler 186f remained uncertain. The scars of distrust ran deep, and the temptation for human progress at any cost still lingered. But there was a change, a shift in perspective. The whispers of the network, once unheard or ignored, now resonated within them. As weeks turned into months, a fragile peace settled within the biodome. Humans learned to cultivate their own food within the biodome, utilizing advanced hydroponics that minimized waste. Sylvans, in turn, shared their knowledge of the planet's natural ecosystems, helping humans develop sustainable energy sources. Kyle, the once ostracized outsider, became a symbol of hope. His unique ability, a bridge between humans, Sylvans, and the sentient network, had saved them all. He stood at the edge of the biodome, gazing out at the alien twilight sky. A single bioluminescent vine snaked around his wrist, a silent testament to the bond he had forged. The path ahead was long, fraught with challenges. But for the first time, humans and Sylvans were learning to listen, not just to each other, but to the whispers of the biodome itself. And in that shared understanding, a seed of hope for a sustainable future had been planted.